When Sarah brought him to the house, Emily did not know how to react. Everything happened too quickly. First, conversations about a friend, then dinner, and soon, a suitcase in the hallway and new men's boots at the door. His name was David. Tall, restrained, with light stoop and attentive eyes. He did not try to like it right away, did not build a new father, was just nearby. This in itself annoyed Emily. It seemed to her that he took a place that did not belong to anyone. "Emily, meet you," Sarah said that evening, trying to speak at ease. "This is David." "Hi," she threw dryly. He only nodded in response, as if he understood everything without words. The first weeks were strange. Sarah lingered at work, and at home they often remained too. David did not press, did not ask unnecessary questions, but his presence was felt in everything: neatly folded towels in the bathroom, dinner on the stove, even a light bulb in the corridor, which he quietly replaced. Sometimes Emily caught herself on listening to his steps. In the evenings, sitting in a room with a book, she caught his low voice from the kitchen when he talked on the phone. Calm, confident, not at all like the noisy and fussy acquaintances of her mother. Once, going out into the kitchen, she found him for cooking. He concentratedly cut vegetables, and the light from under the lamp fell on his shoulders. "You know how to cook?" she asked, trying to make it mockingly. "I had to," he answered calmly. "I think you should also eat." She sat down at the table and first tried the food prepared by him. It was delicious, but she could not admit it. "Not bad," she said, pretending to be indifferent. "Thank you," he said, as if he understood her pretense. At school, Emily often listened to the conversations of friends about guys, dates, first kisses. She nodded, but inside it seemed to her that all this was too noisy, too superficial. And at home, there was silence at home, and a man appeared in this silence who knew how to keep silence so that it became more important than any words. One evening, Sarah called and said that she would delay. Emily was sitting in the living room when David entered and put a cup of hot tea in front of her. "With honey," he said, not asking. She was surprised. No one had noticed how exactly she likes. "Thank you," she said quietly. He only nodded and sat opposite. For some time they silently looked out the window. Snow, lit by a lantern, slowly fell there. The room was warm, but Emily felt something else, a strange calm, as if you could stop playing indifference next to him. Every day she began to notice him more. His habits, movements, even how he holds a mug. Sometimes he held his gaze, but immediately averted his eyes, as if he was afraid to cross the invisible feature. Emily did not understand what was happening to her. She tried to write off it for boredom, to the fact that now they spend a lot of time together. But inside the strange feeling grew, a mixture of curiosity and light excitement when he was near. One evening they stayed in the living room. The TV showed the old film, but none of them watched. His hand accidentally touched the armrest next to her hand. Emily felt his heart hit harder. She did not move away. "Everything is fine?" he asked, noticing her tension. "Yes," she answered, trying not to meet his gaze. Silence filled the room again, but now it was different, dense, like air in front of a thunderstorm. That night, Emily could not fall asleep for a long time. She lay, looking at the ceiling, and remembered his every movement, every word. The thought arose in her head for the first time, maybe he also feels something? But then she pulled herself. No, this is impossible. This is wrong. And yet, the heart refused to listen to the mind. The next day, Emily tried to behave as usual. But this, as usual, became more complicated. At school, she was annoyed by empty conversations of friends about guys and parties. She answered absently, and she caught herself thinking that in the evening she would be at home again, where he would cook tea or repair something in the workshop. You're completely in the clouds," her friend Lily remarked. Do you have someone? No, of course, Emily answered sharply and turned away to the window. She tried not to show how these words touched her. Did anyone appear? Funny. But why, with this thought, his silhouette immediately arose before his eyes. In the evening, Sarah again lingered at work. Emily entered the kitchen and saw David stood at the sink, rolling up his sleeves. On the table, foods were neatly laid out, and it smelled of fresh bread in the air. Are you cooking again? She asked, trying to hide a slight excitement. But someone should feed you, he said with a slight smile. Emily sat at the table and watched. She noticed how calmly he moves, how everything works out without any words and fuss. Her friends always seemed noisy and uncertain, and next to him there was another feeling: confidence, silence, reliability. When he put a plate in front of her, she smiled a little. Thank you. You always do everything right. He looked at her a little longer than usual. But he said nothing. After dinner, Emily turned on quiet music in the living room and got a job on the couch with a book. Soon David joined her. He brought a plaid and silently laid it nearby. Are you always taking care of it? She asked, looking at him from under her eyelashes. It's just a habit, he answered. Sometimes people need a little more heat than they themselves recognize. Emily fell silent, feeling that his words touched her deeper than she wanted. She took refuge with a blanket and pretended to read again. But in fact, every gesture caught, every pause in breathing. Music played quietly against the background. The room plunged into the soft twilight. She noticed that their knees were almost in contact, and this petty coincidence suddenly became more important to her more than anything else. Later in the evening, when Sarah finally returned, Emily felt the tension disappeared. But the strange feeling that made the evening special disappeared with him. Mother chatted about work, about colleagues, laughed, opening the wine. David listened, inserted short remarks. Emily sat silently, and no one paid attention to her silence. She realized that she was waiting for these evenings when only they remain at home, and immediately frightened this thought. A few days later, snow fell again. In the morning, Sarah left before everyone else, leaving a note on the table: "Do not forget to have breakfast." Emily went down in his pajamas and found David with a cup of coffee. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Yeah," he nodded, smiling a little. "You look sleepy." She sat opposite and looked at his hands, tightly wrapping around the mug. Inside her again, something was piercing. "David," she began and immediately stopped short. "What?" He looked up at her. She hesitated. "I wanted to ask if he was bored with them. I wanted to ask why he is so calm, even when her mother is nervous. I wanted to ask if he notices how she sometimes looks at him." But the word stuck. "Nothing," she breathed. He looked another second, then looked away and took a sip of coffee. In the evening, they watched the film. Sarah lingered again, and Emily was no longer surprised. She sat next to him, and the screen was reflected in his eyes. At some point, the plot became uninteresting, and she stealthily began to watch him. His profile seemed serious, almost strict, but softness lurked in the corners of his lips. She thought that she had never looked at people like that before. The film is over, but the silence remained. Emily squeezed a blanket and decided, "David, someday, is it difficult?" He looked at her with a question. "What exactly?" "Well, to be here. With us." He thought. "Difficult? No. It happens unusual. But I'm glad I can be near." Her heart was beating faster. She lowered her eyes, hiding a smile. That night, Emily lay again for a long time without sleep. His words spun in his head. "Glad I can be near." For her, these words meant more than, possibly for him. She caught herself on what was waiting for a new evening. And for the first time, she admitted to herself, she was drawn to him. Winter stretched endlessly. The snow lay with a heavy bedspread on the roofs. The streets glowed with the cold light of the lanterns. Emily more and more often caught herself thinking that the house became for her not just a refuge from the cold, but a place where things are happening, which she could not tell anyone about. She began to notice David in everything. In how he repairs a broken cabinet door. The way he straightens the blanket on the couch if she falls asleep during the film. In how silent, and in this silence there is more meaning than in dozens of other people's words. One evening, Sarah left for her friend. Emily stayed at home, lazily scrolling through books in her room. Below there was a dull sound as if something fell. She went down and saw David in the living room. He tried to fix the old floor lamp, and one of the screws slipped out of his fingers. "Help?" she asked. "It would be nice," he answered. She crouched nearby and gave a screw. Their fingers touched each other for a moment. It was by chance. But Emily felt the current passed on her skin. "Thank you," he said quietly. They both pretended that nothing special happened. But the air around has become harder. Later they sat on the couch. The floor lamp was already shining with a soft yellow light. Emily pulled her legs to her chest and wrapped herself in a blanket. David held the book, but, it seemed, was also immersed in his thoughts. "You are always so calm," she said suddenly. "Even when Mom is nervous." "Maybe I just learned," he answered. In life, much is easier to accept than arguing with this. Emily looked at his face. She wanted to ask, "Do you accept me too as I am?" But I did not dare. The next day at school, she again felt a stranger. Friends discussed a party with a friend. Lily whispered, "You have to go, maybe we'll finally meet someone." Emily only shrugged. She knew she does not want to go, because there was someone else in his thoughts. In the evening they were again together. Snow outside the window walked densely, covering everything around with white silence. The house was warm, and this difference seemed almost symbolic. Emily made tea and brought 2 cups to the living room. "That's how you are doing," she said, and handed one to David. He smiled. "You remember." She felt the warmth inside, but not from tea. They sat, hiding in one blanket, because it was more convenient. The film went back to the background, and no one watched it. Their shoulders touched each other, and each sigh seemed louder than usual. "Emily," he suddenly began, but immediately fell silent. "What?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Nothing." But her heart was already beating as if he had said more than he wanted. At night, Emily could not fall asleep again. She left the room, quietly went downstairs, and stopped at the doorway of the living room. The light was burning there. David sat in a chair and looked thoughtfully out the window. She wanted to leave, but he turned around. "You are not sleeping?" he asked. "It doesn't work," she admitted. He nodded, pointed to the chair nearby. "Sit down." Emily got a job opposite, hugging her knees. For some time they sat silently. Only the clock was ticking on the wall. "You miss the past life?" she asked suddenly. "Before us." "Sometimes," he answered honestly. "But I don't regret it." Emily looked into his eyes. There was not a shadow of doubt. And this scared her most, his honesty. When she returned to her room, her heart pounded as if she had just done something forbidden. But nothing happened. Nothing. She lay down on the bed and pressed the pillow to her chest, feeling that she was holding more than she could endure. And for the first time she admitted to herself, what was born between them could no longer be called just sympathy. On Christmas Eve, Sarah again went to the hospital on duty. The house was filled only with the soft light of the garlands and the smell of needles. Emily, as if specifically, lingered below, slowly to go to her. David was sitting in the living room, fingering a box with toys for the Christmas tree. "Will you help?" he asked, and there was a simple request in his voice. She came up, sat down next to him. Their hands touched each other several times when they got balls and figures. It would seem chance, but each of them left a mark. "And this star is better to hang above," said Emily. "Then you will have to keep her while I climb," he smiled. She held out the star, and he carefully took her. Their fingers again touched. And again, silence between them has become harder than any words. When the Christmas tree shone with lights, they froze together for a moment, admiring the result. The room was filled with soft golden light. "Beautiful," Emily whispered. "You have talent," David answered. "I would not have done it without you." She turned her head. Their views met, and the time seemed to stop. But he quickly averted his eyes, coughed, and went behind the circles of cocoa. Later they sat on the couch, covered by one blanket. On the knees of Emily lay a mug, in the hands of David, a book that he did not even open. The TV worked without a sound, as if for eyes avert. "Someday you had a feeling that something is changing," Emily began and hesitated. "But you don't know how exactly." "It was," he said quietly. "This often happens when you are still too young to explain it." She bit her lip a little. "And you? Now?" He looked up at her, but said nothing. And in this pause, she understood the answer. The clock was struck by 11. Emily did not want to go to his room. For the first time in a long time, it seemed to her that reality is more important than sleep. "Thank you for being here," she said suddenly. "And where would I go?" He tried to smile, but caution felt in his voice. She moved closer. Their shoulders contacted again. David took a deep breath, as if struggling with himself. "Emily," he said, "do you understand that not everything that seems correct is actually like that?" She nodded, although she did not understand everything. She was enough for her that he uttered her name with a tone that she had not heard before. Later, when she rose to her, the room stood in the room. Emily sat down on the bed and looked out the window, where the snow slowly fell in the light of the lantern. She hugged the pillow and smiled at herself. "My heart was pounding too loudly, my thoughts got confused." She knew their secret has not yet been uttered aloud. But it was no longer possible not to feel. The next day, Sarah returned home, tired, but cheerful. In the house, her quick steps, a sonorous voice, the smell of spirits, sounded again in the house. Everything looked as before. But Emily understood. For her there is no longer as before. She looked at her mother and caught herself on a strange feeling of guilt. But whenever her gaze involuntarily met with David, another feeling woke up inside, too strong to ignore him. And Emily began to realize, sooner or later what they hide will still come out. January turned out to be especially cold. The snowdrifts at the house had already reached windows, and every evening, returning from school, Emily felt that she was drawn not so much to the warmth of the house as to the presence of one person inside him. She tried not to show it. But every look, every word, every moment of silence between them only confirmed more strongly. The secret does not live in words, but in the air around. One evening, Sarah lingered again. Only garlands on the Christmas tree and soft light from the kitchen were burning in the house. David was sitting at the table, sorting through the papers. Emily stopped at the door, hesitating, then entered. "Can?" she asked. "Of course," he nodded. She crouched opposite, wrapped her hands on a mug of hot tea. For a while they were silent. "David," she said quietly, "sometimes it seems to me that I feel everything too sharply." He looked at her carefully. "This is fine. You grow up. You will have many new feelings. But some," she hesitated, "some remain. And do not let go." Something flickered in his eyes, from which Emily's heart clogged stronger. But he did not say a word. They later sat in the living room. The TV showed the old cinema, but the screen was just a pretext. Their hands were too close on one armrest. At first by accident, then, not quite. Emily knew, you just need to succumb to a little and this will change everything. But instead, she quietly asked, "You feel it too?" David froze. His face remained calm, but his eyes betrayed him. He sighed deeply. "I feel a lot, Emily. But not everything can be called your name." Her cheeks flashed. She looked away, but inside she felt a strange relief, he admitted, albeit not directly. That evening they said goodbye quieter than usual. When she got to her, she sat on the bed for a long time, thinking. She understood, the line was drawn, and they will not be able to cross it. But this is what made their secret even more. Soon, weekdays returned to their places again. Sarah laughed in the morning, rushing to work. Noise, phone call, smell of coffee, everything looked like before. Only for Emily, as before no longer existed. She learned to smile at everyone, pretend that nothing had changed. But every time their views with David met, she felt the same tension. It has become part of their common silence. In the spring, the snow came down and the world came to life outside the windows. Emily watched the meltwater flowing down the asphalt and thought, time goes and much could change. But the fact that she survived in these months will remain with her forever. It was more than just sympathy. It was a feeling that taught her to be silent, listening and keeping secrets. In the evening, when the sun was leaving for sunset, she went to the veranda. David was already there, stood looking at the horizon. Emily came up and stopped nearby. For a while they were silent. "Everything will be fine," he said suddenly, not looking at her. She nodded. "I know." And this was enough. They did not say a word to each other. But everyone understood. Their story has already been written. And let it remain in the shade, in disabilities, in pauses between phrases. This is what makes it real. Emily smiled, looking at the outgoing sun. It seemed to her that there was still much to come. But she knew one thing for sure. The special light that once lit up inside her would never go out.